You think you know what a mother's love looks like? Wait until you hear what this woman did when her son walked back through her door after 15 years. She had given him everything, and when he came back, he brought a stranger with him. A woman who smiled too wide and spoke too sweetly and wanted everything Margaret had left. What happened inside that house over the next 3 weeks would shake that family to its roots, and nobody saw it coming. Not even the son who thought he knew his mother. Welcome everyone to another story. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? Florida, Lagos, maybe Trinidad or the United Kingdom? Let us know. Now listen, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make your blood boil. But first, let me tell you about a woman named Rosa.
Rosa Imelda Christensen was 62 years old when this story began, and she was the kind of woman who made a place feel warmer just by being in it. Not because she was loud or showy, she was neither of those things, but because she had a way of paying attention to people that made them feel like the only person in the room. She listened with her whole face. She remembered things: your coffee order, the name of your sister's dog, the birthday of your child you mentioned once in passing 6 months ago. People said Rosa had a gift for people. Rosa said she had just lived long enough to know that people were worth the effort. She was a medium-built woman with brown skin the color of warm cedar, silver-streaked hair she kept pinned back in a low bun, and dark eyes that missed very little. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow from a fall she took when she was 9, and she wore the same small gold cross at her throat that her mother had placed there when Rosa was 16, and had not removed it since. Her hands were always doing something: folding, stirring, smoothing, sorting. She was not comfortable with idle. She never had been. She lived in a 2-story house on Birchwood Street in a town called Halverton, a working-class neighborhood where people knew each other's cars and checked on each other's elderly and argued about the same things every summer at the block association meeting. Her house was the one with the yellow shutters. She had painted them herself 12 years ago and repainted them every 4 years because she believed a house said something about the person inside, and she wanted hers to say, "Someone cares here." The front porch had 2 wooden chairs and a small table that always had something on it: a coffee cup, a potted herb, a library book she was halfway through. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and the lavender sachets she kept in every closet. The kitchen was the heart of it, large and slightly worn, with a cast-iron skillet she had owned for 23 years hanging on a hook beside the stove. The floors creaked in 3 specific spots that Rosa knew by heart: the second step, the spot just inside the kitchen doorway, the patch near the back window. Those creaks were like old friends. They announced the house to itself. She had a garden in the back, not a fancy one. Tomatoes, green beans, a few herbs, some flowers she grew more for the bees than for herself. She went out there most mornings in her old green robe before the day started, with her first coffee in both hands, just standing among the plants and letting the morning settle around her. The neighbors knew not to call before 9. Rosa was in the garden before 9. She had raised her son Marcus alone from the time he was 7 years old, when his father, a man named Dale, had left for reasons Rosa had long since stopped bothering to catalog. Dale had his own story, she supposed. It just wasn't the one that mattered here. What mattered was that she had been 31 years old with a 7-year-old boy and a mortgage and a job at the county health office that paid well enough if you didn't make mistakes. She didn't make mistakes. Marcus had been a quiet child, serious in the way that children of single mothers sometimes are, like they understand too early that the world has weight to it. He helped without being asked. He came home when he said he would. He got decent grades without Rosa having to push. She had worried about that sometimes, the quietness. She wanted him to be a child, not a small adult carrying her burdens. She worked hard to keep her burdens off his back. She kept the money conversations away from him. She kept the fear away from him. She showed him the good parts and handled the hard parts herself, the way mothers do. He had a best friend growing up, a boy named Jerome, who was practically a second resident of the house on Birchwood Street. Jerome was everything Marcus wasn't: loud, laughing, always moving, always eating Rosa's food without being asked. Rosa adored him. She fed him like her own. Jerome's mother worked nights, and his father worked out of town most months.
So Rosa made sure Jerome had somewhere to be. She made sure without making a production of it. That was her way. Marcus left for college at 18 and came back at 22 with a degree in business and a head full of plans. He worked in Halverton for 2 years, lived at home, saved money. Rosa watched him grow into a man with something like reverence. She had done that. She and nobody else.
She held that quietly, like a lamp. Then Marcus met a woman named Priscilla. Priscilla was 28, sharp-dressed, quick with a compliment that somehow left you slightly off balance. She had a laugh that was too big for the room, and an opinion about everything, and eyes that counted things. Rosa noticed the eyes. Rosa noticed quite a lot about Priscilla from the first meeting, but she said none of it because Marcus was 30 now and a grown man, and she had not raised him to be managed. Priscilla and Marcus were together for 2 years before he told Rosa he was moving away. Not far, 2 states over, but far enough that visiting was a thing that required planning. He had a job offer. Priscilla had family there. It made sense. Rosa said, "Of course, sweetheart. You go live your life." She meant it. She drove him to the U-Haul place. She helped him load boxes. She cried in the garden that evening where nobody could see. The years passed. 6 of them. Then 9. Then 12. Then 15. Marcus called every month or so, sometimes more, sometimes less. He visited at Christmas most years, though not every year. There were always reasons: travel costs, Priscilla's family, schedules. Rosa understood all of it. She told herself she understood all of it. She kept the garden going. She kept the yellow shutters painted. She kept the cast iron skillet on its hook, and the lavender in the closets, and the 2 chairs on the porch. She had friends. A church group she attended on Sundays. A woman named Gloria down the block who was her age and had raised her children alone too, and with whom she drank coffee on Saturdays and talked about everything. She was not sitting in the dark waiting for Marcus to call. She had a life. She had built one, carefully, from the materials available. But there is a difference between a life that is full and a life that has the piece it's missing right in the center of it. Pay attention to what happens next. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening in September. Rosa was in the kitchen, the skillet on the stove, making the chicken and rice dish she had made every other Wednesday for 30 years. The smell of it was the smell of this house. Garlic softening in oil, the rich, salty warmth of the broth going in. She had the radio on low. The light was that particular September gold that comes through west-facing windows in the evening. Marcus called and said he was coming home. Just like that. He said he and Priscilla wanted to visit. He said they had some things they wanted to talk about. He said he would explain everything when he got there. He said it would be great to see her. She said, "Of course, sweetheart, you come home." She hung up and turned back to the chicken and rice. She turned the heat down a little. She stood there with the wooden spoon in her hand, not stirring, just holding it. Something in his voice had a shape she couldn't quite make out yet, a shape like a weight being carried carefully. He had said some things they wanted to talk about. She stirred the rice. What Rosa didn't know yet was that those things would change everything. Marcus arrived on a Saturday with Priscilla and 3 large pieces of luggage. Not weekend bags, the kind of luggage you bring when you are not sure how long you are staying. Rosa stood on the porch in her good blue cardigan and watched them come up the walk. She hugged her son, held him a full moment longer than necessary, breathing in the fact of him, the physical, real solidity of her boy who was 42 years old now and had gray coming in at his temples. She felt him stiffen slightly and then relax into the hug, and that stiffening told her something. She hugged Priscilla. Priscilla smelled like a department store and said, "Rosa, this house is absolutely charming," in the voice she always used, warm on the surface, assessing underneath. They sat in the living room. Rosa brought coffee without being asked. The September light was doing its thing through the front windows, and the house smelled like lavender and the coffee and the last of the garden tomatoes she'd put in a bowl on the table. Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands folded. He looked at Rosa, and then looked at the floor, and then looked back at her. He said, "Mom, "We're in some trouble." She said, "What kind of trouble?" He said the business had not gone the way they planned. He said there had been debts they couldn't cover. He said the apartment was gone. He said they needed somewhere to stay, maybe a few months, while they got back on their feet. Rosa looked at her son. She looked at Priscilla, who was looking at her nails. She said, "Of course, you're home. Both of you. Stay as long as you need." And that single moment set off a chain of events nobody could stop. Because what Rosa did not say in that moment, what she held behind her teeth in the same way she had always held the hard things, was that she'd seen this coming. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. The shape of Priscilla. The shape of a woman who counted things and added them up. But she said nothing, because Marcus was her son, and he was home, and the house was warm, and that was the beginning of what mattered. The first week was fine. Marcus helped in the garden. He fixed the creak on the second step, which Rosa had privately been meaning to fix for 11 years. They ate dinner together every evening and talked. Real talking, not the surface kind, the kind where you find out how a person has become who they are in the years you weren't watching closely. Rosa learned things about her son that she had not known. She had not known, for instance, that he had struggled with his confidence in his 30s, that the business had been partly her fault. That was his word, fault, and he said it quickly and moved past it. She let him move past it. She stored it. Priscilla was a different matter. Priscilla moved through the house like she was already calculating what would stay and what would go. She made small comments about the kitchen being inefficient, about the furniture being dated, about the neighborhood being quiet in a way that suggested she did not mean it as a compliment. She left her things in the bathroom in a way that said she was spreading out. She took the good chair in the living room and set her laptop there and worked from it most of the day. Rosa watched all of this. She said nothing. She had learned, over 62 years, that some things you watch before you speak. But the real shock was still coming. It was Gloria who brought it to her attention, because Gloria was the kind of friend who said the things that needed saying. She came for coffee on a Thursday morning and found Priscilla in the kitchen making breakfast without offering to make any for Rosa, who had already been up for 2 hours tending the garden. Gloria sat down at the kitchen table and watched Priscilla move through Rosa's kitchen like it was her own. After Priscilla took her plate to the living room, Gloria leaned across the table and said quietly, "Rosa, how long are they staying?" Rosa said, "As long as they need." Gloria said, "Has she said thank you? Once? For any of it?" Rosa was quiet. Gloria said, "Has Marcus?" Rosa looked at her coffee. "He helped fix the step," she said. Gloria looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "That woman is not here to get back on her feet. That woman is here to get comfortable, and she is counting on you being too kind to say so." Rosa said, "You don't know that." Gloria said, "Rosa, I have known you for 21 years. You know things about people before they know those things about themselves, and you know I'm right. You just don't want to say it because saying it means something about Marcus too." The silence after that had a particular texture. Heavy. True. But this story is far from over. 2 weeks into the stay, Rosa was moving around the house early one morning, 5:30, the house still dark, when she heard voices from the guest room. Not arguing, talking, low and deliberate. She was not trying to listen. She was walking past. But sound carries in old houses, and the door was not fully shut, and she heard her name. She heard Priscilla say, "This house is worth something, Marcus. You know that." She heard Marcus say nothing. Priscilla said, "She's 62. She lives alone. She doesn't need 2 stories." Marcus said, "Priscilla." Priscilla said, "I'm just saying there are options. If she downsized, the money from this place would set us up properly, and she'd be somewhere smaller, easier to manage. We could even find something for her near us." Marcus said, "She's not a problem to be managed." Priscilla said, "I didn't say that." Rosa stood in the hallway. She was in her green robe. She had her coffee in both hands. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She stood completely still for a full minute. Then she walked to the kitchen and sat down at the table,
and looked at the cast iron skillet on its hook and thought for a long time. She thought about what it meant to hear those words from inside the walls of a house she had painted and repainted, a house she had kept and tended and made warm through 26 years of doing it alone. She thought about the yellow shutters. She thought about Marcus at 7, standing in this kitchen in his pajamas asking for cereal. She thought about loading the U-Haul.
She thought about Christmas visits, and the ones that didn't happen, and the phone calls that were monthly, and then less. She thought about the step that creaked for 11 years and was fixed in a week. And then she drank her coffee and went out to the garden. What she was about to do would change everything. She called Marcus into the kitchen that afternoon while Priscilla was out. She sat him down. She put 2 cups of coffee on the table, and she sat across from him, and she looked at her son. Really looked, the way she had looked at him since he was born. And she said, "Tell me what is actually going on." He held the coffee cup in both hands. He did not look at her for a moment. Then he did. He said, "She's not happy, Mom. She hasn't been happy in a long time. And I think she blames me for the money situation. And I think she blames me for not—" He stopped. Rosa said, "Not what?" He said, "For not having more to show for it. By now. At 42. He said it in a voice that had shame in it. Rosa sat with that. She said, "Marcus, do you know why I never told you about the hard years?" He looked at her. She said, "When you were growing up, the years when money was tight and I was working 2 jobs and I wasn't sure about things, I never told you. Do you know why?" He said, "You didn't want to worry me." She said, "That's part of it. But the bigger part was, I didn't want you to feel like a burden, like the reason things were hard, because you weren't the reason. You were the reason I kept going." She paused. "And I think somewhere in growing up without me ever showing you the cost of things, you grew up not knowing how to value what you have. Because you never saw me struggle for it. You only saw me managing." He was quiet for a long time. She said, "You have a woman in this house who is looking at my walls and doing arithmetic. And I heard her last night, Marcus. I wasn't trying to, but I heard her." He closed his eyes. She said, "I am not angry. I'm telling you because you are my son, and I have always told you the truth. And the truth is, I will not be moved out of this house, not by money trouble, not by a woman who sees my home as an asset to be liquidated. This house is mine. I earned it, and you know what it cost me." He opened his eyes. They were bright. He said, "Mom, I would never." She said, "I know you wouldn't, but she would. And there is a difference between what you would do and what you allow." That sentence landed somewhere in him. She watched it land. She said, "That is the thing I want you to understand, Marcus. Not what you are capable of, what you allow." He looked at his mother, and for a moment he looked like the boy he used to be. 7 years old, serious, understanding the weight of things too early. And then he looked like the man he was, the man she had made. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom." She said, "I know you are." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Now, tell me what you actually need, not what Priscilla needs, what you need." And he told her, all of it. Everything that had been building for years, the business pressure, the unhappiness, the feeling of being with someone who kept a running score of his shortcomings, the way he had started to see himself through her eyes and didn't like what was there. He talked for a long time. Rosa listened the way she always listened, with her whole face. When he was done, she said, "You have been carrying a woman who has been slowly taking you apart, and you have let it happen because you were ashamed to come home and say so." He said nothing, which was the same as yes. She said, "Shame is a terrible reason to stay anywhere, especially away from the people who love you without a scoreboard." 3 days later, Priscilla left. It was not a dramatic scene. There was no shouting. Rosa was in the garden when she heard the cab. She looked up over the fence and saw the 3 large pieces of luggage going into the trunk. She saw Priscilla, sunglasses on, standing very straight. she saw Marcus standing on the porch with his arms at his sides. She watched Priscilla get into the cab, and she watched the cab go. She did not come inside right away. She gave her son the minute he needed. Then she came in through the back door and put the kettle on. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table when she came in. He looked wrung out. He looked light, both at the same time, the way you look when something heavy has finally been put down. She put a cup of tea in front of him and sat across from him and said nothing for a while. He said, "I don't know what I'm doing next." She said, "I know." He said, "Is it okay if I stay?" She said, "Marcus, this is your home." He looked around the kitchen, the skillet on the hook, the lavender smell, the morning light coming in through the window over the sink. He looked at it all like he was seeing it after a long time away, even though he had been in this kitchen every day for 3 weeks. He said, "I forgot how this place smells." She said, "How does it smell?" He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Like someone is always home." She looked at her son. Something moved behind her eyes that she did not let become tears until later, in the garden, with her coffee and the morning around her and nobody watching. The weeks that followed were quiet in the best way. Marcus got a remote job. He fixed other things around the house, the loose board on the back porch, the bathroom faucet that had dripped for 2 years, the sticky kitchen drawer Rosa had been working around since 2019. He came to the garden in the mornings. He started drinking coffee instead of the energy drinks he'd been running on for years. Rosa watched the tension go out of his shoulders over the course of 2 weeks like a tide going out. Gloria came for coffee one Saturday morning and found Marcus in the kitchen making breakfast for 3. She stood in the doorway and looked at Rosa with an expression that said, "I told you." Rosa looked back with an expression that said, "Yes, you did." They sat down and the 3 of them ate and argued about the best way to make rice, a conversation with no correct answer and no real end. And the kitchen was warm and loud and smelled like everything good. Jerome came by one Sunday afternoon, now 43 and a little rounder and laughing exactly the same way he had at 12. He walked into the kitchen, saw Marcus and said, "You came home." Just like that. Marcus said, "Yeah." Jerome said, "It's about time." And then he sat down and ate Rose's food without being asked, exactly as he had always done. And everything about that felt right. One evening near the end of October, Jerome's daughter came with him, a small girl named B, 6 years old, with enormous glasses and strong opinions. She sat at the kitchen table across from Rosa and studied her for a long moment. Then she said, very seriously, "Are you Marcus's mom?" Rosa said, "I am." B looked at Marcus, then back at Rosa. Then she said, "He talks about you like you're a superhero." Rosa looked at her son. Marcus was looking at the table. His ears were red. Rosa said to B, "Is that right?" B nodded with complete authority. "He said you never stopped." She thought about it. "He said you were the most not-stopping person he ever saw." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Rosa said, "Well," she cleared her throat, "I suppose that's something." That night, after Jerome and B had gone, after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean and the house was settling into itself the way old houses do in the evening, Marcus came to find Rosa on the porch. She was in one of the 2 wooden chairs with her tea, looking at the street, at the orange light from the corner lamp and the dark shapes of the trees. He sat in the other chair. They were quiet together for a while. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry I stayed away so long." She said, "I know." He said, "I think I thought, if I stayed away, I didn't have to admit that things weren't going the way I planned. Like coming home was the same as failing, and I didn't want to fail in front of you." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, I never needed you to succeed in front of me. I needed you to be honest in front of me. Those are not the same thing." He was quiet. She said, "Succeeding is something you do for yourself. Being honest with me, that is something you do for us."
and I would have traded 100 of your successes for one honest conversation. The street was quiet. A car moved through the intersection down the block.
Somewhere, a dog was having an opinion about something. Marcus reached over and took his mother's hand. She let him. His hand was big around hers. She always forgot how big his hands had gotten every time she held them again. She thought about a hand that had been small once. She thought about the garden and the yellow shutters and the creak on the second step that was silent now. She thought about what it had cost her, all of it. And she thought about what it had made. She held his hand on the porch in the October dark and she was still. That was enough. More than enough. And that's where we'll leave this story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from this? See you next time.